This is huge. And I don't think we really completely understand the impact yet. But this brings transgender equality to the state of Utah, and it might well bring it to other states in the nation as well.
Now that was Angie Rice, a transgender woman speaking in a press conference last Thursday. The Utah Supreme Court ruled that transgender Utahns will now be able to change their name and gender marker on their birth certificates and other state records. This was a legal battle 3 years in the making. So welcome to our In Focus discussion tonight on transgender state records ruling. Joining us now for a live panel discussion are petitioners Angie Rice and Shawns Gray and their attorney Chris Wharton. Thank you all for joining us tonight and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Of course.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, so we are in a panel format, so don't mind if you talk over one another, that'll all work out. We want to start the conversation with you, Angie, at your comfort level. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My journey, excuse me,
Yes.
it really started when I was a young child. I grew up in Vermont, and I have clear memories by the time I was 8 years old that something was very, very different and confusing inside of me. I couldn't, of course, tell anybody or ask for any kind of help about something like that back in those days. And I spent my entire life from that young age all the way until I was 49 years old, keeping that very deep and troubling secret to myself inside me. I excelled in all the sports that I played in. I excelled in academics. I went on to graduate from the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs in 1984, all the while keeping that a secret inside me. I went on to be a pilot in the United States Air Force for 20 years, and during that time I spent 5 years flying rescue helicopters and 15 years flying the KC-135 in 4 different models in combat support and special operations. My 15 years in the Air Force during that time covered combat time for Desert Storm, the Somalia operations, and the civil conflict in Bosnia-Herzegovina. I always held that the most difficult thing that I ever did in my life was not that,
Wow.
but keeping that secret trapped inside me. My wife at the time, there's no secrets between us. We were married for just short of 30 years. Neither one of us ever really understood it, but we kind of lived with it in private and in secrecy. When I retired from the Air Force in 2004 and retired here to the state of Utah with my family, I immediately started to self-medicate with hormones because I thought that I was smart enough to maybe like control, what was happening inside me and still keep it a secret. And nobody should ever do that. And with Thursday's ruling, nobody ever moving forward has to do something as dangerous as that. And so I did that for probably 6 or 7 years before I went under a doctor's health care, for proper health care. And so since I've also done that, I've been a public school teacher in the state of Utah. It was in 2015 when the laws protected, myself and others from being fired from a job, which was, of course, that was terrifying to me.
Right.
The thought of that happening, not being able to provide for my family. And so when Utah passed the non-discrimination laws, part of me even then didn't think that it applied to me.
Wow.
And so I loved and trusted very dearly said, Angie, when you're defending or fighting for someone else, you're fierce. You're like your dad. But when you're doing it for yourself, you're not so good at it. So it took me a while, to even realize that applied to me too. Lots of publicity came in October and November of 2015 when the Wall Street Journal kind of crowned me with the title of the first openly transgender teacher in the state of Utah in public education. So for the last 15 or 16 years, I've been at the same school, working with special needs children at Roy Elementary School, for Weber School District. And for me, the welcome mat was kind of put out for me.
Wow.
With such great respect and acceptance. And that's been that way now, for 5 or 6 years.
Something you weren't necessarily sure would come, right? Having that acceptance.
Never thought that would come.
Angie, thank you so much for sharing a bit of yours. I know there's so much more we could even share.
No,
Shawn, we want you to have the same question. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself to your comfort level?
Yeah. So I'm a Utah native. I was born and raised here and I grew up LDS in a very religious home. And I just never fit in. I never felt right with myself. And I didn't understand why I didn't feel like a girl. I didn't get along in my own self. And I just never had that opportunity to make my childhood happy. It took a long time to discover the words transgender. I actually have 2 coming outs. And when I was right after high school at 19, I came out as a lesbian because it felt like it was the only option. It just still didn't feel right. And so after some situations that happened and getting into therapy and finding the words, I finally discovered, the reason being you don't fit in, you don't feel right in your own body is you're transgender, Shawn. You've got to acknowledge that. And so it took a long time to get there. And, living authentic is important. And so, it's taken me down a lot of paths to discover that. I was suicidal as a young kid. And I say that I failed at suicide wonderfully because even though it was scary to be in that situation, I know that I'm here for a reason and that it does get better. It does get better. And so, that it took a long time to get there though. Right. And I have a great support system. Family's been a little rocky. I love them. They still love me, but it's still a little rocky. And, but I just have to choose authenticity.
Yes, powerful. And powerfully when you say you found the words and were able to finally express what you were feeling. So going back to 2016, Shawn, we'll have you answer this. You and Angie petitioned to the district court to change your legal sex designations because they did not match your identities. Tell us why this is important, and then also why what barriers and challenges and difficulties you were facing because of it.
Well, when I started in August 2016 on this road, it was actually going down a different path to make sure that my legal documentation matched my identity so that I could petition to adopt my stepchild. And so it really started off with that, with some recommendation on get this done first so that we can, accomplish these things so that it's not one of the hurdles. And so that's what I did. And, so it was a pause in, the next part of the process for my family to become the family we are. And so, it's, it's hard to talk about because it's so emotional for me. But so it was a hurdle, and it's been a hurdle to from that moment where that petition was denied. Half of the petition I requested was approved. Wow. I was given my legal name, and so my name matched my face on my ID, but that little marker has hindered a lot of progress, and caused a lot of things like my dysphoria was so high that it stopped me from flying. Wow. It stopped me from from living at points in my life.
Angie, Shawn, and Chris, we do need to just hold this thought for just a moment, take a quick commercial break, but when we return, we'll of course resume our In Focus discussion, that discussion being transgender state records ruling. We'll be right back. And thank you for staying with us for our second In Focus discussion tonight on transgender state records ruling. Before we went to break, we were joined by petitioners Angie Rice and Shawn Gray and their attorney Chris Wharton for a live panel discussion. So we're going to pick up right where we left off. Let's start with you, Chris. Can you tell us when you got involved with this case and began representing Angie and Shawn?
Yeah, I knew Angie beforehand, and just as a friend, and in the LGBTQ community, and so I was with Angie from the beginning. Shawn, I got connected with after he had tried to start the process on his own, and someone else in the community connected him with me. We filed some additional briefing in Shawn's case, trying to get the right decision at the district court level. And when we were unable to do that, we thought that both Shawn's case and Angie's case would be the perfect cases to appeal and get clarity from the Utah Supreme Court on this important question.
Right. So, Chris, what do we know about how gender marker petitions are handled in other states, and how did that information play a role in your arguments for the petition?
Well, it's pretty similar to other states in most respects. Other state statutes are a little bit different here and there, but Utah's statute and most of the statutes in other states are based off of the same model act that was adopted by the vast majority of state legislatures in the 1970s. So it's not altogether dissimilar from other states.
Okay. Tell us, in the Utah Supreme Court ruling was a decision 3 years in the making. Can you explain why it took so long to finally get an answer on that petition? 3 years seems like a long time, is it, realistically?
Yeah, well, you would, that is an inordinately long time. It was almost 3.5 years. Most Utah Supreme Court decisions are under advisement for about 6 months. So
wow.
Ours was, yes, considerably longer. And I don't know exactly why, the justices meet and they deliberate and they exchange preliminary drafts of the opinion, and all of that is confidential. All of that's part of their private deliberation process. But I think you can tell from the opinion, and you could tell from the oral arguments that we had back in 2018, that there was definitely a concern that one justice had about the fact that our case didn't have any opposing party. No one was opposing the petition. It was just that the district court would not grant the relief that we were requesting. And in the end, the majority of the court sided with the vast majority of judges across the state of Utah who have been using this uniform or near uniform standard for decades. So in that sense, we weren't asking the court to do anything radical. We were asking the court to do what the vast majority of judges were already doing. And that, in the end, that was persuasive to the court majority.
Wow. Okay. Well, Shawn, let's head out to when a transgender person's name or gender on their state documents and records do not match up who they are. What kind of impact can that have legally and psychologically?
Well, legally, I mean, most of it for me was really psychologically, just the fear of being discriminated against because of it. Legally, there's all sorts of what if questions we could get into on it, but it really came down for me psychologically. When you order a drink as an adult and you're questioned because of your ID, it doesn't feel good at all. But there's, medical, there's all sorts of things with medical and coding and billing and things like that happen. And questions from credit card companies that question your identity because it doesn't match up.
Yes. Oh my goodness. And Angie, what would you like to add? Anything to this, if anything?
Yeah, quickly, I would say, when we sat in that courtroom and that was the judgment, that was emotionally crushing. And when I sat out with counsel after that meeting, it was decided at the table there, after a lot of tears, that I wanted to fight for my dignity back because I thought that it had been taken away. But bigger than myself, I also wanted to be part of fighting for the dignity, of young people and everyone else in the state of Utah, because we lived torturous lives, and I didn't want that to continue. For any of the young people who were coming up, and some of the older people who have lived their entire life being marginalized. I'd like to thank, honestly, I'd like to thank the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court justices. I know it took a long time, and it was a painful wait, right? But over this 3.5 years and longer for Shawn, we've often been told that we had the courage and grace to see it through. Well, what I do understand now, and I understand better than I ever have, was that the justices on the Utah Supreme Court did right by us and did right by other transgender individuals in Utah. And I'd like to thank them for having the courage and grace after a very long time to make it right.
Yes, such a gracious thank you. Again, courage and grace to see it through. Angie and Shawn and Chris will again hold that thought. We have to take another quick commercial break, but when we return, we'll resume our In Focus discussion on transgender state records ruling. And welcome to our third and final In Focus discussion tonight on transgender state records ruling. Before we went to break, we were joined by petitioners Angie Rice and Shawn Gray and their attorney, Chris Wharton, for the live panel discussion. Now we're going to pick up right where we left off. Let's start with you, Chris. Really, we need to talk about the significance of this ruling. It didn't just affect Angie and Shawn. How will it affect transgender people across the state?
Well, this is really important for all, not only transgender, but intersex and non-binary Utahns, because it means that instead of when a client comes to us and says, I want to get a name and gender change, instead of our first question being, what county do you live in, and having to go into an explanation that depending on which judge we get, we might get a favorable, or we might get the relief requested, or we might not get the relief requested. This means that any client anywhere in the state of Utah that wants to have their name and gender change, that decision is going to be made on the merits, and it's not going to be based on which county they live in or which judge gets assigned to their case, which courtroom when they end up in. So we'll have a uniform standard that will be applicable across the state. And Utahns can expect that if they meet the standards set forth by the court in this petition, that the relief that they're requesting will be granted.
Wow, huge, right? Well,
Yes.
Thursday's, Chris, let's continue. Thursday's ruling from the Utah Supreme Court, a big victory, as you just even told why, for Utah transgender community. But the work in progress just doesn't end there. What other changes do you want to see in the state's legal system to really help improve quality of life for those transgender people?
Well, of course, we want to continue to see equality on all fronts. We want to make sure that transgender Utahns are treated the same, not just in employment and housing, which the state has acted on, but in other areas as well: public accommodations, health care, credit and lending practices, all of those areas where we still lack explicit legal protection. And then, of course, we want to continue to protect transgender Utahns against some of the bills that we're seeing advance in other states across the country that would ban them from participating in sports or that would ban necessary life-saving treatment for transgender youth. So those are the fronts that we're going to continue to watch and that we're going to continue to push forward on.
The fight is not over.
Nope.
Before we go, thank you again all for taking part. We'll start with you, Angie, as we wrap. We have about 1 minute for your answer on this, but what's your message to those who are watching tonight? What do you want to leave them with?
My message is this is a great state, and people in this state are pretty great. Hope without outcome is to leave hope, to wither and die. Thursday was the outcome, and what happened on Thursday, I want the message to be out to the entire transgender community, that we may have been, the torchbearers, but everyone has suffered the wounds of the journey. And no longer is that the case. When you tell the court in the state of Utah who you are, you meet 2 simple criteria, and then from that day forward in the state of Utah, you are who you are.
Wow, powerful, powerful words. Shawn, we'd love to hear your message as well.
My message is actually for parents and of our trans and non-binary kids. Just love your children and listen to them. It's a journey and a process, and if you're not sure what what the next part of that journey is, we have resources available, and you can search those pretty easily here in Utah specifically. But for our trans and non-binary kids, you're not alone, and there are people here who love you and support you. You're not alone. So I'm out there. Come find me, and we'll walk together through that journey.
You have been hearing from petitioners Angie Rice and Shawn Childers-Gray and their attorney, Chris Wharton. Sincerely, thank you all for joining us here tonight. We celebrate your victories, and there's still a fight to be had, as you have pointed out. Again, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.